Okay, shalom everyone. It is really a zchut to be able to be here at the Yemei Iyun. Kol hakavod to all of you for your dedication, for learning in what is a trying time and coming out. And Bezrat Hashem, all of our dedication and all of our limud Torah will be for the Hatzlacha of Am Yisrael. Amen. Yosef the Egyptian, mathematician. Don't be afraid by the title. We won't be doing too much math over here, but a little bit, and I hope you're curious for that. The question is this: what happened in Pharaoh's court? What happened when Yosef arrives and says his interpretation of Pharaoh's dream, and Pharaoh exclaims, "Ein navon v'chacham kamocha." This incredible impression that Yosef made on Pharaoh. What is the source of this impression? To understand the difficulty of the question, let's think for a moment just how impressive Egypt was. Egypt built the towering, freestanding, human-made structure on the face of the earth for 4,000 years until the Eiffel Tower was built. Egypt had an incredibly developed economy.
Almost 5,000.
Almost 5,000, correct. Incredibly developed economy, lots of spare calories in order to accomplish such a goal. They had well-developed mathematics. We have a Rhine papyrus, which has fractional problems, how to calculate the amount of grain in a silo from 1,650 BCE, Middle Kingdom Egypt, Pachot o Yoter, the time when Yosef arrives. In other words, Yosef comes into a sophisticated, well-integrated, rich, developed engineering world. What is it that he says which impresses them so? Is it the brilliant interpretation? He says, fat cows and skinny cows seem to me like years of plenty and years of famine. Wait, better. Lots of fat, rich grain that turns into skinny grain that comes out of the Nile, or the cows come out of the Nile. That means lots of grain and a little bit of grain. Not a tremendous jump of imagination. So where is the brilliance? Is it the brilliant plan? Let's take lots of grain when we have it and save it for when we don't. Again, Egypt had been working their economy for 1,000 years beforehand. They had, this is a Nilometer. It's actually much later than when Yosef was, but they had them all the way back, up and down the banks of the Nile, measuring exactly the levels and the times. They had tables. They understood that the Nile had a cycle. It went up, it went down. Maybe it was a brilliant prediction. Maybe the fact that 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine was something impressive for the Egyptians. Well, I would just say, whenever you have surplus, put it away. Why do you have to know exactly how much time? In fact, that's what the Egyptians did. They had a variable tax season. When times were good, they taxed more and they put things away. They were doing this well before Yosef came. So what is his chidush? I'm going to tell you the answer right now, at the beginning of this year. Yosef utilized our human superpower to frame reality with words. He used language in ways which changed the reality. Now, that might sound like a commonplace. If I walked into this classroom and I said, wow, what a tired bunch of distracted, uninterested students, would not set the tone for a very successful shiur. If I walk into the classroom and I say, what an incredible bunch of people who are so on their edge to find out what I have to say, that changes the reality of the shiur. We know this. I want to show you just how far this goes. The power that language has to really shape reality, not just our experience, how we feel good, but our sense of time, of our want and satiety, and even numbers. Even mathematics are affected by the way we frame things. And that's how I want to start, by talking about a cow is a cow is a cow. Okay, I hope you can see this over here. I know my framers, it's on the screen as well, but it's a real physical thing. I actually printed a whole bunch of copies for you, so you can take this home and try it at home. You have to cut it out before you do, but this is a little remembrance of this year. Go ahead, if you would, would you count, sir, the number of cows over here? You can count cows, it's okay.
70.
How many?
70.
No. 15 cows. 15, right? On the screen, 15 cows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay? Watch carefully now. Just going to slide this over here. Nothing up my sleeve. Nothing over here. Over here. Same picture, same cows. Go ahead and count the cows. Changing the screen. Look at that. Even the animation is in place. Go ahead. Change the cows. 14 cows. Fat cows into skinny cows. How did that happen? How could we take a simple count and change it right in front of your eyes? You can look at the picture and you could see that maybe a little bit of cow went over here or a little bit of cow went over there, but how did a whole cow disappear? I'm going to show you how the trick works. It's not really difficult to explain, but the fact is, we're going to not take questions, so hold them to the end, is that all right? The fact is, it's the ability to fool your eyes conceptually that's the real trick over here. So this is a model of where the cows were. The blue bars are mass, let's call them the flesh, the meat of the cows. There are 210. Each one will say represents 100 pounds. I can group each of those 100 pounds in groups of 15, okay? And then my count is 14 cows. A total of 221,000 pounds. Each cow 1,500 pounds makes 14 cows. Now with a slight maneuver, we just shift the cows over so each and every cow reduces just a little bit. The cows are now 14 each. They divide and they make 15 total cows. The numbers change. And the illusion works because you don't detect the difference between a 1,500-pound cow and a 1,400-pound cow. If I say a cow is a cow, you count them, and I say the cows aren't the same cows between the first counting and the second counting, but you don't notice that. This is a deep idea that we're going to unpack in a moment. Okay, what do I mean when I say Yosef was an Egyptian mathematician? The Egyptians had an incredible system of mathematics in which they used fractions for their symbols. Where we would use digits, 2, 3, 4, they had a symbol for a half, for a quarter, for an eighth, for a 16th. When they wanted to do 1, 2, 3, 4, they just did simple scratches over there, which means their focus was on fractions. Now, this is a large shear that I don't have time to unpack fully for you. I want you to just put that fact at the back of the mind and think about what would it mean if your mathematics was fraction-based as opposed to whole number-based. Now, Yosef is called Hamashbir. Okay? Hamashbir is the one who provided grain, shever. He was there, he provided for all of Egypt. But in that word mashbir is the word shever, which means a fraction in modern Hebrew, but even in ancient Hebrew means to break something into pieces. So perhaps the ability to ration things out, divide it up in the correct amounts, is part of the sense of what mashbir is, and if so, it connects us to the deep mathematics of Egypt. In Paro's court, Yisaper Paro lehem et chalamo. Paro went ahead and spoke his dream to everybody. That word lisaper is going to be key for our analysis. In English, it's translated nicely as Pharaoh recounted, playing on the play of recounted and counted, lisaper and lispor. In Hebrew, it's all there. And so this connection between telling a story and counting is what I want to focus on. It's as if I told you I'm an English professor and a mathematics professor at the same time. What does telling stories have to do with counting things? That's what I want to get at. Call out to allatorah.org for picking up on that play of translation. They supported all our translation here today. Okay, 23 times in Chumash, 23 times and only 23 times does the verb lisaper or lispor show up. This is the breakdown. All 23 are listed on your source sheets if you want to look at them. We're going to look at the most common places where they are. They're at the beginning when we talk about the uncountability of stars, seeds, sand. In the dreams, lispor, to tell the dreams, it shows up very centrally over there. And days and weeks, counting mitzvot. The Zav counts his days. We count Sfirata Omer, of course. And we count years, 7 times 7 years, to get to the Yovel. This verb shows up connecting dreams, counting time, and uncountability. And that, to me, is very suggestive. Let's talk about uncountability for just a moment. Yosef says, after he gathers up the grain, the Torah tells us, Chadal lispor ki ein mispar. There was so much, there was no number to count it. What do you mean, no number? There was a lot of grain. There was 27 million metric tons. We could show up. We could have a number for how much grain there was. And in fact, the Egyptians had numbers for very big symbols for very big numbers. This is actually a good Dvar Torah for you, Pesach time. Frogs is the symbol for 100,000. So one frog becoming many frogs is actually right there in the Egyptian hieroglyphics. But the idea of uncountability, what makes something uncountable? I asked Google, how many stars are there? And Google answered me, in the universe, 200 billion trillion. Very simple, very nice. Okay, now I know, 200 billion trillion. What was the difficulty of counting? The answer is, that's not counting. That's calculating, estimating. To count is to take a star by star and count it, or grain by grain and counting it. When I do this, when I group things in this massive numbers of a billion trillion, what in fact I'm doing is saying the individual grain is infinitesimally small in that group. And that's what makes it uncountable. This is a little math language to say as a number gets very big, the portion, the fraction of that number, of the individual thing in the larger thing, is almost nothing. So being part of something really large is the inverse of being something really small and insignificant. There are words that we count. If I would say, I have 7 water, I have 16 time, I have 25 sand. Even in English, we don't count those things. We don't attach numbers to them. What we do is we put them in boxes and we say, I have 25 liters of water. I have 27 metric tons of sand. I have to put them into containers. Hold on to that, and we'll get a little further. Okay. 3 pairs of dreams. This is the overall structure. Again, it's written out on your piece of paper. Yosef has 3 encounters dreams in 3 pairs. Okay, every time there's 2 dreams together and they're closely related. When he is young at 17, he dreams about sheaves of wheat surrounding the brothers, bowing down to him in the middle. And then he dreams about suns and stars and moons all circling around him again at the middle, and this makes his brothers very mad. Then he's thrown into slavery, goes down to Egypt, goes to the house of Potiphar, gets thrown in a dungeon, meets a wine butler and a baker. And they also tell him 2 dreams. One dreams about grapes and grape juice, and the other dreams about baskets and baked goods. And Yosef goes ahead and interprets their dreams. The interpretation is so good that they call him back when Pharaoh needs an interpreter. And Paro also has a pair of dreams. Cows, 7 cows, fat cows and 7 skinny cows, 7 fat ears of corn, 7 skinny ears of corn, or of wheat, ears of grain. Each of these dream pairs has a number associated with it. There are 11 stars, numbered stars. There are 3 days, or 3 tendrils, srigim, 3 baskets that become the days in the interpretation. There are 7 cows and 7 ears of grain. What do these things represent? Well, in the Paro's dreams, they represent years. In the dreams of the baker and the butler, they represent days. So we're getting a time theme over here. If there's a time theme, could we look to stars and moon and sheaves of wheat as reflective of time? I think absolutely yes. The sun, stars, and moon back at Breshit were set up in order to mark time. The Torah tells us, Hayu la'otot u'lemodim liyamim u'leshanim. That's what the stars were. Not only that, but the stars are there limshelet liyom, v'limshelet laila. They're there to rule. That should be a key word for you, connecting us back to Yosef's dream. Because that's exactly what the brothers complained about. Will you rule over us? Oh, what about the sheaves? Thank you for that. Okay, that leads us right in. Okay, counting mitzvot. We said at the beginning, lispor yamim, sirata omer, is a place where counting shows up in our dream. We count as a mitzvah days, we count weeks, and we count years. In our dreams over here, years show up as the cows. Days show up as the days in the baker and the butler dream. What about weeks? Weeks are the sheaves. Sfirata omer. An omer is a sheaf, right? Is a binding of things together. It's precisely what omer is all about. Why would an omer be connected to a week specifically? So here we have to understand a little bit about time. Days are natural time. What I mean by that is, I don't decide how long a day is. I go outside and I measure sunrise to sunrise, and nature tells me what a day is. I don't decide what a month is. I measure new moon to new moon. I don't decide what a year is, equinox to equinox, but I do decide what a week is. A week is a social construction. It's any group of days that I decide works. And that is exactly what a binding of sheaves are. Nature decides there's one stalk of grain. I decide how many grains to put together to make my omer. Sometimes I work very hard, sometimes I work very little, but it's a social construction of how much it is, and sometimes it has very large implications. If your ration for a day is an omer, and you're told you have to gather, you're paid by the omer, how big your omarim are can be a really big definitional change in how much you get paid that day. Back to our dream symbols. If we look, we see that in every single dream, there is wheat that shows up at different stages of development. A stalk at the beginning, sheaves when they're gathered together, and baskets of finished baked goods. If we look at the comparison part of the dream, we see that we have things that I would like to suggest relates to things that are fluidity. What do I mean that? Certainly grape juice, wine, compared to baked goods is fluid versus a dry measure. But cows are ascending out of a river Nile. That's kind of suggestive, which means, I would like to suggest, that stars, moon, and sun is talking about something fluid, the flow of time. And that if you want to mark time, because we said earlier, time is uncountable, so what you do is you put the uncountable flow of time into containers, measures, units, cycles. And that means you have choice. You construct your time with the units that you put the flow into those particular sheaves of the size that you choose. If you're looking for measures or containers or clocks, they're all over these dreams. The sun and moons are clocks, the omer is there, the wine, paro, has a cup, there's a basket, a specific dry measure over there, and then you have this weird thing about cows containing other cows, and wheat containing other wheat, which, going back to my image, I think is exactly that. You can take 7 and put it into a smaller 7 and maybe change your count. You can take a certain amount of days that makes one kind of year, put it into another grouping of years, and get a different kind of year out of that. All of that put together leads me to conclude that over here are all the elements of Ibur Shana. That's the Jewish way of which we make a calculation of the dates, of how we work the calendar, how we measure time. Now, before we look at this carefully, let's do a quick review of how we mark time in the Jewish calendar. This is before there was a calendar, okay? This is what the Torah said you're supposed to do it originally. Shamar et Chodesh HaAviv. Guard the month of Aviv. How do you do that? Well, you take a Chodesh, which is given to you by the moon, and you guarantee that it shows up in springtime. How do you guarantee it? Well, sometimes with the month that shows up at the wrong time, you have to delay that month, add an extra month to make sure that springtime is always the month of Nisan, of Pesach, always falls there. How do you do that? Well, you know that the lunar year, lunar months, 12 of them are short, 354 days. The solar year, equinox to equinox, is 365 days. So if you want to go ahead and decide whether a month is going to be Nisan or not, year 0, I take a look, I say, well, if I put Nisan over there, month number 1 after month number 12, it falls in the spring, all is well and good. We declare Nisan, year 0 is a regular month. We move a year forward. This is year 1 over here. It started at the beginning of the equinox. I want to declare Nisan at the end of year 12. I take a look. Nisan is falling in winter time. That's not going to work. The equinox is too late. What do? I do Ibur Shana. I just add a 13th month. When Rosh Chodesh shows up, I have no control over the moon. I have no control over the sun. But I do have a control of what name I give that month. I could call it Adar Bet. I could call it Nisan. And so my naming of things controls the length of my years. That becomes a leap year. In year 2 follows suit. Or we call it Adar 1, Adar 2. It could even be considered one long month. Back to our dreams. Look at all the elements of Ibur Shana over here. 11 plus a sun and a moon. That suggests to me 11 could be 12, could be 13, depending on how you count it. The harvest guaranteeing that the cycle of Aviv, which means not necessarily the equinox, it means the ripe time of the grain. That shows up at the right time. And then there's this really interesting suggestion of the baker and the butler were not waiting for any 3 days. What happened at the end of 3 days? It was a known event. It was Paro's birthday. Yom Huledet. The only birthday that shows up in Tanakh. What do we call a molad in Hebrew? What does it refer to? The new month. It's an astronomical event. It's a conjunction. It could also refer to any specific event that in the flow of time, like the flow of a pregnancy, there's a turning point, a specific pointable point in that. That's the molad. And you have these large years and these small years. So I think looking at Ibur Shana over here is a fair interpretation of Yosef's dreams. One tribe...
What was the last line over there?
Just big years and small years, right? The fat cows and the skinny cows being compared. Okay? You're skeptical, that's okay. One tribe becomes 2 tribes. Yosef is that tribe which had Ephraim and Manasseh included in the 12 tribes. So he's also the person where 12 becomes 13, as 12 months becomes 13 months. And separately, the symbol of Yidgula Rov is Pisces, is the month of Adar. The Ravad mentions that. That's a little far. Okay. Why is this important? Because when you take control of time this way, when you do a calendar, the Jewish way to do a calendar, then you are framing time in service of your interests, of our interests. It's not a fixed calendar that dictates and determines time for you. You have to live according to the calendar. The calendar lives according to you and what you need it to be. It's a symbol of freedom. It's a symbol of getting out of the fate of an Avodah Zarah culture and saying, you have control. If we talk about choice in counting, that's okay. Everything's under control. We're talking about interpreting the situation. Yosef interpreted dreams. If there are interpretations, then there are interests. Why do I interpret something this way as opposed to interpreting that way? If you're sensitive to the choice about interpretations, then it's all over the dreams. Watch this. When Yosef, Paro tells his dreams, Ein potero tam leParo. No one had a solution for Paro, the specific solution that Paro needed. It was tailored to him. When they described the dreams of the baker and the butler, what Yosef did so well, it was ish kechalomo patar. Every dream according to its individual needed interpretation. If you take a look at, this is my favorite one, and it's a little bit subversive, okay? So we think of Yosef as being this incredibly religious, dedicated, devout Jew who is showing, I am just a channel to God's ultimate knowledge, right? It's not me. These answers come directly from Hashem. I'm about to turn that on its head, okay? When Yosef says, Le'elohim pitronim, he's saying God has lots of solutions, plural. There's lots of ways to skin this cat. There's lots of ways to count this situation. There's lots of ways to decide how the months and the years lay out. Sapranali, tell me your needs, and I will give you an interpretation which works. If you take a look at what Yosef says, Ba'od shloshet yamim yisa paro et roshecha. In 3 days, Paro will lift off your head and return you to your position. Okay? That is the positive interpretation of the dream of the wine butler, and it works. The language is almost precisely the same with the baker. Ba'od shloshet yamim yisa paro et roshecha mi'alecha. He's going to lift up your head, right off your head, and hang you. It's showing you how close two things can be, almost precisely the same, and yet have a world of difference between them. Yisa et Rosh is also counting language. Tisa et Rosh b'nei Yisrael. It's all about, it shows up all over Tanakh. Tisa Rosh is how you count things. So I want to give an example of perhaps how it worked, just to concretize this idea of interpretation and how numbers can mean very different things depending on how you count them, or the context, the interpretation you give. It's Sunday, and I say to you, my birthday is in 3 days. When do you show up? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, birthday party on Wednesday. Or perhaps, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, my birthday is on Tuesday. What if, on Paro's birthday, which everybody knew about, it's no secret that they were dreaming about something showing up in 3 days, is a day that Paro, like presidents on their last day of their candidacy, give out clemency, they give out pardons. And you knew that. And Yosef said, in 3 days, show up at Paro's birthday party, and maybe he'll pardon you. The wine butler understood correctly that meant show up on Tuesday, and the baker showed up on Wednesday. Okay? The different interpretation of how you count, this is 3 and that's 3. Yosef made no lie. But the difference is all about how you interpret it. Subjectivity in counting shows up in the halacha as well. If we take a look at Nisan, the spring equinox, let's say, for example, falls on the 3rd of Nisan. Okay? The days and the nights are equal on that day. Rabbi Yehuda says that's the end of the season. Rabbi Yosef says it's the beginning of the season, which is to say, we could count the 3rd of Nisan 2 totally different ways in that same reality. It could either be the first day of spring, or it could be the last day of winter. How you count it, how you define it, has nothing to do with the fact of the equinox, but how you define it. Oops. Okay. Ein navon v'chacham kamocha. Those are Paro's words to Yosef. In Dvarim it says, Rak am chacham v'navon hagoy hagadol hazeh. A great compliment. All the world will know how brilliant we are. Am chacham v'navon. Those words are understood by Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachmani in Gemara and Shabbat to mean the ability to calculate astronomical seasons. So that is right there in the complement of this ability to have this superpower, we'll call it. Okay, so we've talked about the connection of subjectivity in counting, sipur and mispar, how we can change our counts, change our time, even change our age, depending on how we count. What does this mean for Yosef in Paro's court? What about changing our worth, or changing our happiness by the way we tell or the way we count the story? In other words, let's take a look at subjectivity in economics and how to use a famine to your advantage. Okay? This is what opened my eyes, seeing the subjectivity of counting when we go back and read the story of Yosef. This is Yosef's interpretation. V'kamu sheva shnei ra'av achrehen v'nishkach kol hasava be'eretz Mitzrayim. 2 things about Yosef's interpretation jumped out at me. Number 1, the relationship to the years of scarcity, to the years of plenty, is v'nishkach. They will be forgotten. It's psychological. It's nothing to do with the reality of whether there is bread or not bread, or what's in the grain store. It's the feeling of those years are behind us. They're forgotten. Secondly, the years are described as years of ra'av and years of sava, hunger and satiety. I practice saying that word, satiety. Ra'av and satiety, okay? It's not about batzoret, scarcity, not enough. It's not about the lack of rain. It's not about what happens in nature. It's about the experience of having hunger or having plenty. How does it play out? Read carefully what the Torah says happens with the onset of the famine. V'tichlena sheva shnei hasava asher haya be'eretz Mitzrayim. They finished. They finished completely. They were concluded. Why were they concluded? Because Yosef said so. V'tichilena sheva shnei hara'av lavo. And the 7 years of hunger began. How do you know 7 years are about to start? How do you know it's the start of 7 years when it starts? It's only because Yosef scheduled the hunger. He put it on the calendar for everybody to know. We were all in a panic, gathering everything up, getting ready for this. So the moment the smallest drop of the Nile happened, everybody said, oh, here it is. Now it's coming. We're in the Rav. And it says the reality in the ground did not change. B'chol eretz Mitzrayim haya lechem. They had bread. It was stored up. It was fine. Except in the very next pasuk, V'tirav kol eretz Mitzrayim, v'yitzak ha'am el paro lalechem. Why? Because they had food anxiety. It was real. But it was because of the expectation, because of the schedule that was set by Paro, right? Ka'asher amar Yosef. That's the pasuk. Like Yosef said, it came on. Yosef names 2 sons between the years of plenty and the years of famine. The first, he names them before the year of famine. Again, something happens before a great big event. How do you know when you're naming your child that it's before something that's about to happen? But he names Menashe for God made me forget all my travails. That forgetting in anticipation of what's happening is in his name of his son. And the second son, which really should be the first son, because first there was fruitfulness, the second son is fruitful in the land of my affliction. Ephraim, fruitful. This is a little bit of economics of probably, or my imagination of what may have happened to cause the panic. During the years of satiety, you would bring 3 bushels omer to the bank, the Pitom and Ramses Arei Miskanot, Chischonot, right? Savings banks. They were saving cities. You put them away, and you got 3 tokens. Came the years of hunger, you brought those numbers of tokens to the bank, and you pulled out your omer, and everything should be fine. You put away enough to cover you, you took it out when you needed it, everything should be fine. Except, again, if it's 1 omer to 1 token, then you bring that 1 token, you get 1 omer back in the years of hunger, and no problem at all. But if an omer is represented by money, a silver coin, kesef, kisufim, how much you desire it, its relative value. So then you bring that same silver coin in a year of hunger, and it only buys half an omer. Its value has gone down, its purchase has gone down, because everybody wants food in years of hunger. So you can't buy the same amount. That means that the money, the omer is in the bank, the commodity that Pharaoh has was plenty. The money that they had was much less, and Yosef could collect everything they had. If you did it some way differently, if you guaranteed the relationship between an omer token and the omer itself, then in years of satiety you could say, I could take my token and people could trade it for a silver coin. I could buy something useful with that silver coin. I would take my token now, not the silver coin, my token to the bank, pull out the stock, which is mine, my omer, and because it's hunger, that grain itself is worth tremendous amounts. That means that in years of hunger, my property went up because I owned it. I didn't sell it. It was mine all the time, being saved for me. And because they're coming from all over the world to buy my grain, the act of putting it away in the savings bank serves my interest as the individual. What's an omer? Yosef, Rabbi Grossman challenged me and said, if you're right about this omer ma'alim alumim question, then why doesn't it say making omerim right there in the Yosef dream? So this is my answer. My answer is there is a distinction between talking about making omerim and gathering sheaves. When Yosef talks about binding sheaves, he's talking about the action, the labor, the job of gathering sheaves. When we come to the story of the omer, which shows up in the manna, in the desert, when God provides manna for everybody, then it didn't matter how hard you worked. You went out to the field, you worked all day, collect really hard, you still had an omer. You were lazy, chill, laid back, God guaranteed an omer for everybody. It wasn't related to productivity. The omer in that sense didn't matter if you were large or small, working what? It was ish lefi achalo, what everybody needed. This sets up a really interesting economic kind of contrast. In Yosef's dreams, it's gathering sheaves. In the desert, in manna, it's a fixed omer. One is labor, the other is need. One is production and process, the other is final product. You even see this contrast between the baker and the wine butler. The wine butler squeezes the grapes, he works hard. And the baker sits back with his finished baked products, and the birds come and eat them up because they've gone stale. In Yosef's concept, there's a difference between being strong and productive and being weak and unproductive. In the manna story, there's no difference. Everybody gets what they need. One is Shabbat, and the other is the workday. Both are needed, but neither by itself creates a just society. We need to be measured by our productivity and guaranteed a certain amount of what we need in the sense of omer. And this, I think, sets a beautiful idea about Sfirat HaOmer, which is not Sfirat HaAlumim. When each individual on the march between the labor, slavery of Mitzrayim goes to the freedom of Har Sinai, then we are counting omers and weeks, everybody exactly the same. My productivity, my economic worth is not a count. It's all about omers. If it's true that we're connecting Sipur and Mispar and this amazing superpower we have to frame and create reality just by using words, that's a real power. If so, who gets that control? And if so, to what end do you use this power to interpret and shape reality? Well, economics for who? Yosef, as the Egyptian economist, in the space of 10 psukim, despoils the entire nation of Egypt. They come to him crying. They say, give me your money. They say, we have no money. He says, give me your livestock. We have no more livestock. He says, give me your land. We have no more land. He says, give me your personhood. And by the end, we will be slaves to Paro. This is disturbing. This should make us uncomfortable. This is Yosef using his economic power to impoverish a nation. Yosef made this bed, and the question is, are we going to sleep in it? And the fact is, 2 chapters later, at the beginning of Shmot, we're all slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. The Torah here is absolutely begging us to think about the connection between Yosef's success and our later suffering. This, again, is difficult. Before Yosef, people owned money, livestock, property, and land. They farmed for themselves, and there were competing interests. After Yosef, Paro owned everything. There was slavery. People worked for the state. Yosef handed out grain and says, here, I will give this to you from the state to farm, and give me your share of it. And there was central planning. What are you supposed to do? What's the right way to run an economy? It's important to shape time and to measure things and to save things and measure money, But for who? To what end? If we go back to the dreams, we realize that all the symbols are years, days, and family members. That's everyone circling around Yosef in the middle. If you take a look at the halachot of how Chazal said in Masechet Sanhedrin, you're supposed to go about the very careful job of deciding whether we're going to add a month. So those sources are on your page for later. But in general, Chazal says the Sanhedrin has to take a look at the equinox as one factor, but also the harvest. Also the fruit harvest. Is there enough food for everybody? Will the grain be ready in time? Will they have to wait too long before Isser Chadash is stopping them from collecting the grain? Check not the local place, but go through the whole land of Israel. Worry about infrastructure. Are the roads okay? Are the bridges okay? Worry about the diaspora. We have to worry about whether the Jews in Chutz La'aretz can come to the Yemei Iyun on time, and if there's flights or not. If not, maybe we have to reschedule everything to make sure you can come and be with us for Pesach. That's what the concerns were, not how rich can we make Paro. The calculations, the considerations of how and when you would control time, frame interests, were all about the interests of the family, of the greater Jewish people. That's what economics are meant to serve, your people. And there is, of course, due process involved. When Yosef counts the brothers, he says there is 11. What does that tell you? He didn't include himself among his brothers. When his father Yaakov blesses all the Jewish people, all the Shiftei Yah, gathered around him on his deathbed, the Torah tells us at the conclusion of that blessing very, very strongly, Shnemesar. There are 12. The tribes of Israel are 12. That number 12 means everybody. It must mean everybody. It has to be all-inclusive. Yosef is described as a tzaddik, right? He's Rosh Yosef Kodkod Nazir Echav, the crown, the point of his brothers. We call him Yosef HaTzadik. If so, what about this thing that he did to Egypt? And the answer is, I don't have an answer for that. I'm going to leave you with that question. I have told you a story of how I think it works, the method of how a nation could be centralized and impoverished and not be respecting the needs of the people. What the motivations were of a 30-year-old Yosef in the court of Pharaoh trying to help, I don't think he had this in mind, the end results. Maybe Pharaoh did, maybe Pharaoh didn't. But the connection between what Yosef was trying to do and what happened is an open question for you to think about, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that question. I'd like to get a little bit more mathy with you for a moment, okay? Have you been with me so far? Okay, not too much in the numbers situation, but another concept that relates a little bit to what we're talking about. Yosef was in the center. Yosef had everything surrounding him, okay? There's an idea behind that. He was not counted. He was this perfect center who was apart from everything else. As if to say I'm the perfect center of everything. But there is no perfect center. Everybody has a position, everybody has a point of view, and we have to be good enough. And I want to show you how the Jewish way of counting time is a concept of being good enough, which is an important concept. Usually a lot of people don't praise that as lechatchila. I want to say it's actually a very deep concept, being good enough. This was a mind blow when I found it. Okay? The Gemara in Avodah Zarah says that there is a figure, a Avodah Zarah, called Sar Apis. It's a idol, an Egyptian idol, a real idol, we'll talk about in a second. And the Gemara says it symbolized Joseph, who ruled over and appeased, may feast the entire world by distributing the worlds. But it is only considered forbidden when it is holding a dry measure and measuring with it. there is an Omer on this figure's head. This is a real cult called Serapis. It is a syncretic god, meaning combining different gods together. Osiris, the Egyptian god of fertility, with Apis, a bull, a cow, right there in this dream. The Omer is specific on his head. It's called a modius, and it is the official grain measure of the Roman Empire or the Greek Empire or what it was. And it was saying, I believe, this is what an Omer is. There will be no discussion. There has to be an official standard measure. And this is really an image. I didn't make this up. It's the baker with the measure on his head right there talking about Yosef, about the official exactitude of what an Omer has to be in a large industrialized society like Egypt was. If we go back to our talking about time, sunrise, new moon, all those things, and I said they're all natural time, I would ask you, well, exactly how long is this period of time, new moon to new moon? And I will answer, a year is 365.24212 days and counting. Okay? It's a real number. It's a detailed fraction that we can't actually get to precisely. What about a month? 29.53053937 days. In fact, it's not even that. It changes. It's organic. It's alive. It's real. There are months where new moon to new moon's a little longer and sometimes a little bit shorter, and it changes. What about a week? Well, a week we know, 7. Why? Because we said so. Nice, round number because we're in control. What about a day? Well, a day is 24 hours times 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 60 seconds, making 86,400 seconds exactly. Why? Because we said so. We defined 24 hours. We said break that up into 60 parts, break that up into 60 parts, and so our definition is round because we're in charge of it. What happens? How do we deal with these really difficult numbers to make time on the Jewish calendar? Well, we do something which is good enough. We take the real molad, new moon to new moon, and we say, I'm limited to a day measuring period. That's my limit. I can only talk about a month being a certain amount of days. I can't use a third of a day or a fraction of a day, just days. And I say it's somewhere between 29 and 30, and that's going to be good enough. Exactly how? Doesn't matter. 29, 30. How many? When I need a 30-day month, I would put in a 30-day month. When I need a 20-day month, I'll put in a 29. I'm in control because I can play with these numbers. What about a year? Same thing. My measure is a month. I can play with a whole month. I can't talk about fraction months. I can't start or stop the year in the middle of a month. So what's a year? Somewhere between 12 lunar months and 13 lunar months. That's what it is. My approximation of the real equinox and equinox is approached in a rational way by being good enough. And that is a mila. That is a virtue. Why is it a virtue? Well, if I went and I tried to make a calendar, I wanted to plan my times years in advance. I wanted to make a calendar that works for everybody for all time. I don't care what people need in the moment. I want to take control of the calendar. What do? Well, I throw out the months. I just ignore them. I don't worry anymore about if a month falls on a new moon. Just ignore that. What do I do about the years? Well, first of all, if you're a Muslim calendar, then you actually care about the months, but you ignore the years. One or the other, you have to ignore something. Okay? But if we come back to what we do in doing a solar calendar, we make a Gregorian calculation. It's a 400-year cycle that says, out of every 400 years, 303 of them will be 365 days, and 97 of them will have 366 days, and altogether that will approximate 365.24212. Does it work? Almost. Right. It actually ends up being 365.2425 with a 33-second error because nothing's perfect. Even our calendar is slipping, our calendar we use today, by 33 seconds every year.
Every year?
Every year. No, every year. 33 seconds every year, which means we're going to have a problem of 1 day off in 2,600 years. Okay? It's nothing really to worry about. But the seconds are actually a real problem. If you stopped measuring seconds as dividing them up in terms of the year, but you actually had a separate measure, an atomic clock for measuring days, and you actually measured by an atomic clock how long your day is, guess what happens? You find out that the Earth is slowing down. And it's actually not 86,400, but 401. What do? You add a second. You intercalate your day. Anybody notice that? Anybody know when it happened last? 2016. Nobody noticed. We actually have to do intercalation, exactly like Chazal said, no longer about months, no longer about years, but we have to do it because nothing's perfect. And you're going to have to stick in something in your artificial time once in a while. And the Chachmei Umot HaOlam got together in Paris someplace and made a decision in 2016 and added a second at the last second of December 31st. The last minute of that day was 61 seconds long.
But they said they're not going to do it again.
Well, they don't know. They're going to watching the situation.
4,000 years.
The Torah says there is always error. Manage. The idealists, the mathematicians, the Newtons of the world say, get closer and closer to the truth. We need to know the exact number. We need to calculate that calendar so it works. The Torah says, don't stress. Do what you need to do so it works. The Torah on your source has a Mishnah in Mishnah Kalim, which is a fantastic way of how we manage error. The Torah says, the Mishnah says, there is a real Amma out there. There is a real Amma out there that Moshe had. That is the measure of everything, a cubit. Okay, that was Moshe's real Amma. And the smallest measure that we can really get to is a finger breadth. That's actually on, if you take a look at the top, that's an Egyptian cubit, an ancient Egyptian cubit, and also was measured in 7 cubits to a amma, and has finger breadths on it in terms of its smallest measure. Okay, but nothing's perfect, right? So Chazal said, in a room in the Beis HaMikdash, they set up 2 amot to measure. One was a half a finger breadth larger in the northwest corner of this room called Shushan HaBirah. And another one was another measure of error, half a finger breadth larger in the southeast corner of Shushan HaBirah, of that room. Okay, don't get confused. Why? Why was it important to have 2 things? I always thought having 2 measures was a sign of corruption. But here, it's a sign of honesty. Why is it honest? If you translate length into money, and you're a artisan who's working for the Beis HaMikdash, and you are paid or take raw material in an amah's worth, you take the shorter measure. And when you go ahead and you build something as a box and you say, I return something to the Beis HaMikdash, you use the outside boundary of the measure. And the way you do that guarantees that nobody steals from the Kodesh. There's no mi'ilah, which is to say, there is error. There's going to be a measure of incompleteness. And all we can do is be as honest as we can. Go on the short end when you're taking from holy things. Go on the large end when you're giving them back. And that is a way of saying manage error. Newton was obsessed with the Amma. He wrote a whole dissertation looking through Egypt, trying to find what is that real Amma? Because he was thinking like a mathematician. The answer is standard units, what's a meter, what's an omer, are true just because we say so. Because there is intersubjective agreement. There's nothing true or objective or out there in the world about that. We live in a world where as long as we agree to abide by this together, that is a real scientific, empirical way of living in the world, and that is what the Torah recommends. Okay, we are ready for our take-homes. We've had a large excursion all the way through the world of Yosef. We've described his personality. We've talked about his desire to get to the exact right answer. We've talked about the incredible power of using our words to shape reality, to shape our economic, our psychological, even our mathematical reality. What are our lessons? Family first. When you're considering what you're part of, be a one of 12. Consider the needs of the 12 that are around you. Don't be part of a state, something large, an example that you're too big to even count. Make yourself one of an 8 million or one of a 250 million. Be a member of a family first. Of course you're part of a nation. Of course you're a citizen. But the needs of a family are subservient to the needs of the state, not the other way around. A state needs to make you easier, a better parent, a better person to take care of your family. And don't be a one, that person who stands apart, separate from everything, and judges everything else, and everything moves around them. The idea of being a fraction of an appropriate measure, I think, is an important lesson here. Rest. You deserve it like everybody. 1 day in every 7. 7 is Lashon Saba, Sovea. If you want satiety in life, if you want to feel like you're full and you have enough, celebrate Shabbat. Stop your productivity, that endless search for doing more and being more, and say 1 out of 7, I have enough. I'm not an economic person anymore. I'm someone whose all his needs is taken care of. There is no perfect center. There will always be competing interests. You can't hope for a solution that everybody's going to agree with, or no system. There's going to be families, and families are going to compete, and families are going to say, no, do it my way, no, do it my way. And that's the way the world works. The best you can do is manage all those competing interests in a just and honest system where you're listening to everybody who's involved. Be grateful. I made a calculation in loaves of bread. The average U.S. salary makes 86 loaves of bread a working day. If you're a fractionally minded, binding Omer kind of person, then you say, uh-oh, I only earn 80% of that. I only make 69 loaves of bread in a working day. I'm hungry. I'm below average. I'm relative. But if you have an Omer mindset, I have an Omer every working day. I have what I need. I have what I need not relative to some kind of comparison standard. I'm an Omer person, and that gives one Saba. Please God, we will use our superpowers well and be an Am Chacham V'Navon Hagoy Hagadol Hazeh. Our ability to shape reality with a legal, formal system that serves the interests of all of our people, that makes sure that everybody's taken care of as best as possible, is what the Torah comes to teach. And Bezrat Hashem, we will exemplify that going forward as the Jewish people, Am Chacham V'Navon. Thank you.